Thank you for being here today. We are excited to have our Equitable Placement Completion, AB 1705, Calculus with Support, Spotlight on Crafton Hills College, in partnership today with the California Community College Chancellor's Office, Educational Services and Support Unit, as well as the RP Group. So without delay, we'll go ahead and turn it over to our panelists.
So many people, or us in particular, we would sit on the floor and just sort of cry it out and say, what can we do differently? The other thing we really noticed is that students were definitely unprepared for, maybe it was that transition back to in-person, but they just weren't ready for what we were throwing at them and wanting to dive into it as much as me and her wanted to dive into it. So like she said, we kind of just sat on the floor and said, what can we do? So we slowly built what we built today. And kind of thinking about the before and after, how students were before and now, it's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. And that's not to say that we don't still have issues with it, but the stress level in both myself and my students has gone down dramatically with this. And especially with the new upcoming change with 1705, I think that's going to be a huge player in this, and why this will probably help students feel a little less stressed during that time.
Yeah, and we had exhausted students and exhausted instructors, and a lot of that came from there's overwhelm with 705 and 1705 and how much information we are putting into our classrooms, into our lectures. And when we added memorization to that, it became that much more overwhelming. And these methods allowed us to remove memorization. And it's weird because usually by this time we've been asked a million questions about what the methods are. So we have not said. So I'm going to do a quick run through on that. We don't have formal homework. We don't have exams. We don't have quizzes other than like check-ins to make sure people are present. We're doing everything by project-based learning and handouts in the classroom, and we're trying to cut down as much as possible on the time that students are spending outside of our classrooms. So part of that also came from, we have this idea that I sign up for a 4-unit class and then I have a multiplier to tell me how many hours that really means. That communication is not picked up by the students. They don't realize that because I signed up for a 4-unit math class, it means that I need 12 hours outside the classroom. And we can repeat that as we have, but repeating it over and over and over doesn't seem to be making a difference. And so what we did was try to rebuild the class to give the students the opportunity to learn there and then work on projects outside of class. So it's not homework, it's not memorize, it's not, the drilling through my math lab. It is, I'm interested in this subject, I get to do whatever research I want on this, and then I have a project that I come up with at the end and a portfolio that I build throughout the class.
And I think the other thing that I started to get frustrated with was the point picking, and is this going to be on the test? And students weren't just leaning into the concepts and trying to understand them in the big picture. It was, is this on the test? No, then I'm not going to care about it.
Yeah, you could literally see them zone out.
Yeah. And that's not what we wanted. I mean, we are both very passionate about the subject and what calculus can do. So to hear them just say, I don't care if it's not on the test. We knew we needed to change what we were doing to make them interested.
Especially because the things that are often not on the exam are the conceptual understandings, right? That's really hard to give an exam on. And so what they ended up memorizing was how to do this particularly difficult algebra step in the middle of an integral, and not what an integral is or what they've discovered with it. So they could execute an integral on an exam, but when you asked them to find the area under the curve, that threw them. And so it was that disconnect between understanding the concepts and being able to execute difficult algebra steps. What we moved to was different outcomes in the class. We wanted it to be more equitable, more harmonized, better integrated, more simplified, more creative, and more efficient. And we redesigned our course to get us there. I do have to say we owe a lot to Josh Robles, who is here, I think, somewhere in that 83 participant list.
83, it's so exciting.
For his dedication to mastery-based grading and how well he incorporated that into his stats class and got the college on board with that, because that was a huge step in being able to move to the next step, which was project-based learning and really redesigning the classroom. To be able to go through our classes and figure out what are our goals here, what is the big picture, and help get our students on board with that beyond just the student learning outcomes, which can be very generalized and very vague, to get to that mastery-based learning of this is a skill that I have as I come out. And then we can, when we're lecturing, we emphasize to our students, like, as a programmer, this particular skill is going to come up a lot for you. So you really want to lock in here. As an engineer, this particular skill is going to come up a lot for you. So you really want to lock in here, and letting students make those decisions on where do I want to focus most of my time based on my major, based on what classes I'm moving into next.
And it's nice because there's always a lot of overlap, right? Like I just finished a Calc 3 class and a lot of them are saying, oh, I just saw this in physics. Oh, now I understand this because there's that connection they have with their other classes. And when we kind of opened it up and said, lean into your major, I saw such growth, and I know Brandi felt the same way, just student leaning into those concepts and exploring them more, and then like understanding the other classes even more.
We have a question. It says, do you have any data on how your students are doing in their STEM classes, physics especially, that depend on your calculus skills? So no, we don't have that data gathered, but what we do have is our experiences with our students. So this has allowed us to have the students bring in their physics to the classroom and then turn their physics into their project. And so they get a better connection between the two. So when we have our majors that are relying heavily on physics classes, and we know need to take the physics courses in calculus based especially, we ask them to go out to their labs, to go through their lab books, to dig out anything that they're confused on and turn it into their projects. So if you have something coming up that you're really worried about, if you have an exam coming up and you want to cover something, then bring that in and we'll focus on that in your project so we can make that connection for you. And the feedback we have gotten for our students on how helpful that is and how empowering it was for them has been extremely positive. So unfortunately, we don't have numbers for you, but we do have the stories from our students on how helpful it's been. What is the portability of knowledge as students move to other non-project based classes in other classes or at other colleges? Have you been able to get that data? For example, if a student takes Calc 1 this way, but Calc 2 at another college or a non-project format. So we can't track students at different colleges, but we have tracked students within our own college. So somebody that takes one of us for Calc 1 and then somebody else for Calc 2. And we have had nothing but success from that they are able to integrate these topics because they have a better overview of what they were supposed to know in Calc 1. I think that is probably the most frustrating part of teaching Calc 2, if for those who have taught Calc 2, is you get in the classroom and nobody has heard of a derivative or knows what a limit is. And so because we emphasize the skill sets so much as we're going through, we're hearing that less and less often in our Calc 2 courses, regardless of whether they're taking it with us in a project-based setting or taking it with somebody else in an exam-based setting, that the students have a much better idea of what skills they were supposed to adopt in Calc 1. And so they're less blindsided by those skills coming up again in Calc 2.
And I think it helps that we both have taught the series, and so we know what's going to come up in the next one. We know what we need to prepare them for. So we focus on the integrals and the derivatives and understanding what they are. Because right now I teach a Calc 2 and a Calc 3 class, and so like I follow the students as they go, and they're more comfortable in their knowledge, I guess, more confident in their knowledge than I have seen students that come out of traditional classrooms.
They're also much more confident in their vocabulary for math. So I've noticed that students that come from a Calc 1 that is exam-based will be able to do the math if I show it to them. So I might say you need to take a derivative or it's a backward derivative and I get a blank stare, but then if I write the derivative down, right, then I get the aha moment from the student. But if I'm dealing with a student who came from a project-based class, when I say derivative, they have a better understanding of what that means. So they're making a stronger connection to the vocabulary of mathematics. So we wanted to make sure that we were supporting belonging, justice, and dignity in our classrooms. So moving our DEI, anti-racism, and decolonization ideas, which are all separate but come together, into our math courses has been difficult historically. And this was one way that we could do that and let the students guide us more often. So we can spend more time on the ideas behind it, where they're coming from, how long they've been around, and let students grow in their own way and decide their own pathways. And so we will have very interesting projects from students that will do everything from a super elaborate music videos where they rewrite every lyric to a popular song, to in-depth historical projects. In statistics, I've seen a lot of projects on how data can support the Black Lives Matter movement, on how it can support social justice movements in general. And instead of taking the topic that they want to talk about and trying to do research separately, they take the topic they want to talk about and directly support it with data. And that has been very empowering for them.
I've seen both mine and Brandy's data. Sorry, Brandi, I looked at your data.
Okay.
But for
Somebody should.
the classes that we have done this with, that both of us have closed that gap. There is no gap for us now. Every student is passing at the same rate, where before we did have gaps with our Latinx and our Black African American students, and those have since been closed since we started doing this. And that,
We've
I mean,
also seen our success rates skyrocket and our throughput rates skyrocket and our retention rates skyrocket. Our drop rates have been reduced significantly. The amount of students we have not following through at the end of the semester has reduced significantly. And part of that is because we have no due dates, which yes, drives us insane before you ask. Oh yeah. There are some really sucky parts of that.
yeah, this is not all rainbows and wonderful. There is parts to it that are that drive, yeah.
And two, because we allow rework. So if they turn in something that is short of the mark, then they're just informed that, hey, you need to make these adjustments and redo it. And students often, as we know, learn from that, right? And have the opportunity to grow without feeling like, oh, well, my grade sunk in this particular class. Oh, Stephen Reynolds would like to know, what is skyrocket from what completion rate to what completion rate? I believe it was 50 to 90. It was breathtakingly huge. It was not like a 70 to 80. It was 50 to 90. It was huge numbers that we saw in these classes. So this is pre-1705. Our 1705 prerequisite change is not going into effect until fall. So we had pre-calculus as a prerequisite, which is very hard to say. But most often our students were taking the college algebra / trig pathway, and we had already opened up to the high schools. And so we have a lot of fresh out of high school students. The best part, so one of the most difficult parts has been the redos and the no due dates, because it does take a lot of follow-up and a lot of regrading and a lot of one-on-one time with students, and that can be particularly time consuming. One of the best parts has been the no more point arguing, because that was one of the banes of my existence as an instructor, is having students show up with, you gave me a 98, but I feel like I should have a 99. And how exhausting that can be. So when we move to this idea of either you did it or you didn't, we have had significantly less time spent on arguing over small points and more time spent on whether or not they understood the concepts. We have integrated our OER resources. The big thanks to ASCCC and the huge database of OER resources that they have created, including Stats for Social Justice, which made it really easy to adopt. And we have used a lot of ChatGPT. So our students use it, we use it. It has been extremely helpful, especially in teaching in the online environment, to support online learning for mathematics.
I think the only other one was the efficient. So it has upped our time, our one-on-one time with students, but as far as the, monotonous, let me find where they went wrong in a test, we don't have that to deal with. So it's not the like, let me find the answer in this big mess here. So, and I think the prep time has gone down as well, because we don't have those tests that we need to create. We don't have the quizzes we need to create anymore. But like Brandi was saying, there is an up in some other time, but for me, that the one-on-one with students and working with them on their projects and seeing their creativity and working through that, I would rather do that any day than grade 40 tests with 10 problems on it.
Students are also a lot more receptive to the feedback when it's not tied to a grade. So when I can hand them something and say, hey, you got credit for this, but I bet you can do better. I bet you can improve this and you can improve this. I bet you could organize your work better. They're much more receptive to that and start challenging themselves on it without me having to push as hard as I would have to, as I say, oh yeah, you got a 9 out of 10 on this, but it could be a 10 out of 10. And then it becomes sort of the argument on what makes that 10 out of 10, which is usually pretty arbitrary. What makes it really happen? And so rather than worrying about whether or not they get their 10 out of 10, they're more excited of, oh yeah, I could have done that. Oh, I could have seen that. Oh yeah, I can make this more colorful. I can make it more organized. And they're excited to see what they can do with their own work, because they don't feel like the grade is sitting on their shoulders.
The projects are individual, or are they group projects? For me, I do allow a group of 2 if they're making a video. So one of the options we have for our projects is they can make a video, instructional video of them going over problems. And there's usually a lot of creativity with that as well, but I will allow 2 people for that, but otherwise they are all individual.
Kind of the same. I promote individual projects because it gives students their opportunity to be creative, but I have had the calculus series with theater strong students. And in that particular case, there was much more group projects because they wanted a director and they wanted a videographer and they wanted a script writer and they wanted the actors, and that is too hard for one person to pull off. So in those particular cases, they were pretty large groups that came up with some pretty amazing videos. How we integrated this was not that we woke up one morning and threw away our syllabus and wrote a new one. That would have been cool, but not what we're capable of doing. So like we said, big thanks to Josh and his direction on our standards-based grading and moving us to that point, because that gave us a lot of freedom to explore. And if that is all that we get out of this webinar, then that it will make a huge difference in the classroom. We have colleagues that have taken the standards-based grading and stayed with exams and stayed with quizzes and stayed with the traditional classroom and still seen huge upticks in their success rate. And we also realize that our methods and the project-based learning and all the creativity is not for everyone and can be intimidating on its own. So if what we get out of this is just promoting the standards-based grading and giving students control over how they're moving through the class, that is good for us. From standards-based grading, we went to project options for quizzes. So we were doing quizzes for the standards. And as I was doing that, particularly in my trig course, I saw that students were so intimidated by the idea that they had to pass a quiz that they couldn't make it to the quiz. Like they wouldn't even take it. So I had students failing just because they were terrified of taking the quiz. No matter how I prepped them for it, no matter how many times I let them take it, it was just this wall that they couldn't get past of, nope, it's a quiz. I'm going to fail it. It's not going to happen. And so when I switched it to, you can do, I think I started with posters. So I had huge note posters and I would bring those in and say, you know, what I want from you is 2 examples, a breakdown of what we did in this particular section, and how you know that you understand it. So a list of how you know that you know how to do this. And you can replace the quiz with that. And from there, it kind of grew into projects. And Jillian, I don't know how you got to your project-based learning.
Yeah, it was about the same. Like Brandi said, I noticed the majority of the class did well with the standards-based grading and the quizzes, but the same, I would have some students like, I'm not ready, I can't take it. Even though I'm reassuring them, you can take it again, we will work through it, but it's like that word test and quiz just freaked them out. So I did the same. When I first switched, it was, you can do a quiz or you can do a project. And I think I gave a number to it, like you had to do half and half. Because I was kind of intimidated to go full-blown projects myself. I think me and Brandi probably had several panic attacks during all this. So it was a slow transition. But again, I don't know, students just, they freak out when they hear the word quiz. Even when it was, you can redo it as many times as you need, there still was just this wall that would come up that when we give the option of the other projects, they're just not scared anymore. They're not intimidated anymore. They are okay failing when they weren't okay failing with quizzes, if that makes sense. So
I wanted to bring up 2 of the questions again. Martha's question on how they're doing in other STEM classes like physics, and the anonymous question on how portable these methods are. And I want to say that you sound like our students, which is terrified that they will take a class with me that's all lovey-dovey and projects, and then they're going to transfer and fail miserably. And so, yes, I've had many students come up to say, you know, it's great that you want to do projects, but I need to learn this for real. And I need to take quizzes and I need to make sure I have rigor. And so what we have done for those students is they write their own quizzes then. By that, their project is they write a quiz and they have to write a solutions manual, and that solution manual has to include key areas that a student might go wrong. So they have to think through and say a student might drop a negative here, a student might integrate this backwards, and have their own rubric to grade it. And that has helped a lot with those students that are worried that when they get into the next class, they're not going to be able to take a quiz and they're not going to be able to take an exam. They build their own quizzes and their own exams, and they build out their own solution manual and rubric, and that is their project. And it has made them feel much more comfortable when they are moving forward.
I think they just don't recognize it first when we introduce this to them, that they are still learning, right? Because it just is without the stress and without the worry of that like goal of what I'm studying for. But when they leave, I feel like we can ask them any question and they're comfortable with any of the topics without realizing that they've gotten that comfortable with it. I think they're so like programmed to study for a test. Now I feel like I'm learning it, versus they're just open and free and thinking about the concepts and going into this bigger picture, that they're not recognizing that they understand what they're learning.
when I first implemented this, I got feedback partway through the semester that this has been fun, but that this has been fun, but feedback. And it usually comes up when exams and midterms are coming up in other STEM-based courses, that they have that panic attack of, I'm not going to be able to do this. Like, you're really nice and I'm super glad I'm going to pass this. But at the same time, I'm terrified that now I'm going to go fail physics and I'm going to go fail chemistry. And it's all because you're too nice. So when that does come up, I will do things like I will go through my old finals and I will pull one up in the middle of class and write every single problem on the board and ask them to do them. And they will see, every single problem that we've covered so far in the class. And they will see that they can do it. It feels like it's different because you're not doing the traditional methods, but we spend so much time in the classroom environment working on these problems. So they do get, pen and paper practice left, right, and center, that they can succeed at these problems. And when the pressure is removed, they will see that they can complete these worksheets. They can do these problems. They can take an exam and they'll be okay. And I have had classroom after classroom go through those problems successfully and realize that, yeah, it was there the whole time. I just am not doing it in the way that I'm used to. And we have a question. Have you been able to share some of these things with your tutoring center? Yeah, we have embedded tutors. So the tutoring center definitely knows what's going on in our classrooms. And are they changing their use and connection of learning support services as a result of your curriculum changes? Yes and no. So we still have, we're only 2 instructors, so we still have a lot of traditional exams happening. A lot of the students in our tutoring center are there for their other STEM courses. And so I wouldn't say it's been a huge shift in how tutoring happens on the course, but definitely our embedded tutors are receptive to the ideas and have really moved forward in promoting them as much as they can.
I see less cheating on oh yeah. Yeah, the cheating thing, yeah. Neither of us even worry about that now. I did have one student when we first made the change create a study guide, but I could tell it was all from chat. Because it went over concepts we never even talked about in class. So but as far as that, there's not really been any room for cheating because they are choosing their project. Now we do let them use AI to help guide them, like how can I connect this concept with this concept to create a project, but we just don't see that I copied this project from someone else, or I don't know. I don't know how else to say it other than we can't find the cheating. We don't see the cheating.
Right. Even when they ask ChatGPT to build out the entire project, what I have students do, right? Which is, I need a project on differentiating and I like working on cars. They still have to put the effort into the project. And so it still gives them that opportunity to make those connections really strongly. Because we're not just accepting essays, right? And we're not just accepting, something that could have just been copied and pasted from ChatGPT without any personalized effort. It's really eliminated the issue of cheating and has used ChatGPT to help them understand concepts rather than just feed them answers to concepts, because they have to be able to explain it. They put more pressure on ChatGPT to help them do that rather than just tell them the answer. Is this scalable to larger departments, part-time faculty? This is a great question for part-time faculty because obviously that is a huge part of our workforce, and this is not something that we want to hand over to part-time faculty unless we think it's a fair workload. So our focus right now has been, it's going well, so how do we scale it so that part-time faculty can adopt it and not spend hours and hours and hours figuring it out? Right, Jillian and I have put in way more than our 40 hours a week trying to get this organized. And what we don't want to do is hand that over to other departments and hand that over to our part-timers and say, here, just work until you pass out. We want to make sure that it has been scaled well, that we have the training in place. And so that's what we're working on right now. We're especially focused on building out Canvas shells. So I'm teaching fully online right now so that we can focus on just building out Canvas shells that have it embedded so that the grading is easier, so that the redos are easier, so that you can work easier with the deadlines and the lack thereof, and keep it doable for our part-time faculty. So thanks so much for bringing attention to that need.
So Brandi's teaching, I teach fully in person, but I believe you're doing asynchronous, right?
I am doing fully asynchronous this semester. Not for calculus because we are not currently offering that online, but I am teaching stats and math for early elementary educators with our calculus methods in mind of how we're going to adopt this as we get the department on board with moving calculus into the online realm. And I got to say that it has been going really well. So my stats class is 100% hand homework. So they are doing printed PDFs, writing on it by hand, and then uploading it, and I'm going through and grading it. I don't know that I would pass that forward to part-timers because it is a very large chunk of my time to that kind of grading. My math for early education is a little more traditional with the My Open Math to help them through the worksheet that we would normally do in person, and then still has a project-based learning, and the workload for that class is much more doable. So I'd probably make those kinds of adjustments if I move calculus asynchronous.
So number 5, attendance. We've been battling attendance still. One thing we first tried was that they had to fill out a form of why they missed, if it was going to be a perpetual thing or if it was a one-time thing, and then if how they were going to make it up. But for me, in the in-person classes, that still wasn't doing anything because they still didn't, even though they filled that out and they had to go to the tutor center to make it up, it wasn't keeping them in class. So I have switched to weekly quizzes or problem of the day that is just making sure they're understanding the concept and it's keeping them motivated to come to class, because that's now part of their grade is doing those weekly quizzes. And again, what I'm not stressed about when I grade those is if you drop a negative sign, the whole thing is ruined, right? And you get a 0. I'm making sure they understand the concept and they can show me that they know that. Algebra mistakes, I mean, in class today, 1 times 2 all of a sudden became 12. So I get that that is outside of understanding the concept. So I have switched to that for attendance. And then Brandi has switched to, if she's not hearing from them, then that's equaling, you're no longer participating in this course. So
yeah, so that was a particularly big fear moving online because I had seen it happen in the face-to-face classroom where either students wouldn't show up or they would show up but weren't actively participating. You know, they might make it through the motions in the class, but then I'm not seeing the worksheets come back. I'm not seeing projects happening. And then it became this sort of battle of, it's great that you're here, but you also have to do things. And so I was very intimidated about that moving online. And I have integrated staying on top of whether or not students are active in the online classroom much more intentionally. So students will get messages from me that will say something like, I see that you're not active in the class. You haven't turned in such and such such. If I don't hear from you by this date with a plan on how you will be successful in our course, then I'm gonna drop you from the course. So it comes to them to not just say, because what I would get was empty promises. Oh, don't worry, I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna be there. Don't worry, don't worry. And so what I have required instead was a plan on how they're going to succeed. So I need a bullet pointed list on this is the assignments that I'm missing. This is when they're going to be turned in. And that's how I'm going to make sure I succeed. And these are the steps that I'm going to take. And if they can't come up with that kind of plan, then I usually recommend that they go to counseling and remove them from the course, because if you can't self-motivate in this kind of course, then it's not the right section for you. But I'm also extremely transparent with that coming into the course. They have a lot of information, reminding them constantly. They get a lot of warnings at the beginning of, hey, don't forget this course is very lax on due dates, which means that you have to be on top of it or you won't be able to make it through. I do want to share Barbara's comment because that is a bigger question. So she's asking if we have problems with UC matriculation because of the requirement that 50% of the points are proctored. And I think this is more of a system-wide question. We've had this debate within our own campus. I can tell you that we haven't had any issues with matriculation, but I know that this debate is happening. It's happening for all of our classes on what we have to put on our course outlines of record, how much detail has to go into those course outlines of record on how we're being graded and what percent goes where. And I know Josh, just hearing this, is probably flying back to those conversations in curriculum and how often we had these conversations. But I think that that is a particular point that needs more direction on a statewide level of how matriculation works with our methods of instruction and methods of evaluation and how much they really come into play with transferability. And then I saw Eric Cooper raised his hand.
For some research at the community colleges, just listening in, trying to learn. What I will offer up though is if you are a college where you're hearing that UC or CSU is not accepting the curriculum, please let us know. You can let the AB 1705 at cccco.edu email box know, because we want to raise those types of issues at the highest possible level. AB 1705 specifically says that it's the California community colleges that get to control their curriculum. And so we want to work with our transfer partners. And if we've got those specific examples of either individual faculty or individual universities that are calling us out about how instruction is happening, we want to be able to have those conversations with them. So just wanted to throw that out there, and thanks for letting me interrupt.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate that input because I know it's been an ongoing conversation at our own campus, at our sister college, and I've heard it throughout my interactions with ASCCC too, that there's a lot of questions around how do our instruction methods affect our transfer.
I think I'm going to start with what needs and needed work. So there's been a lot of adjustments and changes throughout the semesters of doing this. The thing we're kind of talking about right now is that we have a project checklist that they usually need to turn in with the project. And it just asks questions like, how did you show an understanding? What went well? What didn't go well? Did you receive any feedback? How is this project a college level project versus something in high school? But for me, at least, the answers got really repetitive and it felt like it was just copy and paste throughout every project. So we're definitely trying to work on how to maybe personalize that for each one, and then how we can move that online, since Brandi now is teaching that online. The other thing is sometimes students are overwhelmed with the openness of the project. So we do, in our syllabus, we do give a lot of examples of what that could be. But for some students, they just get stuck in that first bit, being creative. And I hear, I'm not creative, so I can't do projects. So we do want to start building out sample projects, or kind of like a fill in the blank, where it gives explicit directions, like if they're going to make a poster on triple integrals, this is what I want to see. And I know Brandi's working a lot with different data sets and how they can show, I think you did one on Black Lives Matter, right? You said?
Yes, we've done Black Lives Matter, we've done incarceration rates, we've done parental rights removal, some interesting data sets out there.
So we're hoping to build some out so that they have more of a little push if they're worried about being creative and finding something, versus a lot of my students are programming majors. And so they can do a lot with that in the beginning of most of my classes. And then they kind of have to be a little bit more creative in the later sections. But some students have a really easy time coming up with it. Some don't. So we do want to make those DIY projects, if you will, like the house you can order on Amazon and build yourself. The other thing has been check-ins. Sometimes check-ins, that is when we call each student up individually and go over their projects and their worksheets. A lot of students, even though we write the directions, kind of don't know what to expect when it comes to that. So I think we need to rework how we've worded that and the instructions for that, how we talk about that. And then the other thing we want to bring up is a peer review assignment. So instead of just waiting to turn it in at the check-in and then having to go back and fix it while we've already moved on to a new chapter, we're thinking of bringing in a draft and peer review. So maybe a point halfway through that chapter or almost to the check-in, where they can meet up with their other students, go over it to get feedback from them, submit it to us so we can give some feedback, instead of that all happening on that check-in day, because that can get kind of overwhelming.
I want to agree with everything you just said and emphasize that moving to the online environment has actually made a lot of that easier and not harder, because it can be, especially with these projects and how creative they can get, it can be really difficult to go through them with the student, just because some of them are 20-minute long videos, right? And some of them are elaborate. What did you have? Somebody made an entire carnival, like out of paper mache. And so you can't just bring that into a classroom and go over it real quick. It becomes more sort of convoluted in how you get through these. So moving it into the online classroom has helped a lot for my math for early elementary educators. The projects have been directed and open. So say they might have to, how are you going to instruct EEL students? And then there's guidelines on how to make a project for that, but then they're totally free to come up with their own research and how they're going to implement methods for EL learners in the math classroom. Whereas my stats class, which I want to give a huge shout out to Diablo Valley College for what they have put out for their OER resources. They're amazing. And for ASCCC's course on stats for social justice, because it has helped so much building out projects. And so they have a long list of projects they can choose from. And then they're also encouraged to try their own if they want to. So I have students that are highly involved with SSCCC that have submitted resolutions, and they're projects have been data to support the resolutions. So that gives them the opportunity to talk about SSCCC, how it affects every student, what a resolution is, and then also gives them the time in our class to be able to support what resolutions they're putting forward with data. And it has been great. It has worked so much more smoothly in the online environment that when I go back to teaching face-to-face, there will definitely be parts of this that I continue, which is they have a discussion board a week before a project where they talk about ideas and can brainstorm with each other. Their projects get posted into a discussion board so they can all see each other's projects. Whereas in the face-to-face classroom, a lot of it is missed out on. So when I first started it, it was in-person projects and they would deliver it, right? It was, if they made a video, we would watch it. If they had a presentation, we would do it. But it was also post-COVID and my enrollment was really low. So that obviously will not work with 40 to 45 students in a classroom. We wouldn't have time to go through those. So having the discussion boards up where they can post all these videos and talk to each other about their projects is extremely helpful for that peer feedback, for allowing them to grow and for allowing them to see each other's creativity. We normally have like a breakout right now where we would talk about what might be in the way, like what's the most intimidating thing and how we're going to address that thing. Obviously, that's a little more difficult in this. And then we would make the list. So if we're going to start implementing this, then what's the plan for summer? How are we going to baby step into it in fall? And then how are we going to get help? So it might be administration can help us with release time from our 1705 grants so that we can get some of this going. It might be able to buy us art supplies. That was a huge thing when we first started this, is that there was not a single marker or scissor on our campus. So our funding went to making sure every single math class had supplies for students to do hands-on projects. What resources from Diablo? Diablo Valley College had posted in the Canvas Commons a fully OER stats course with integrated handouts that were meant for online that have, it's the most genius way I've seen to lay this out, but they have a PDF that you work on, and separate from that in the instructions from the PDF, they have videos. So it'll be like a video, now try example 2. And then it'll give you a little background on the stats and then another video and now try example 3. And it is laid out so that students, especially online students, have like a step-by-step. If I watch this, then I should be able to do that problem. If I watch this, I should be able to do that problem, which we can see built into something like MOM, but is less hands-on. And so the actual, there's so much of stats that's helpful to draw it out, right? It's helpful to write it out. And some of it needs paragraph explanations. And so being able to integrate that with a PDF that goes back and forth with watch a video, do the problem has been extremely helpful for my online students. This was our quick guide on how to go through a syllabus and recraft it for this. We had how we did our grading, which was they're based on mastery of concepts. They're no partial credit. And the grade reflects whether or not you understood the concept and not whether or not you crossed every T or dotted every I. Our late works were that it could be late, but we, in our in-person classes, we have a hard deadline of once the next project is due, we're not accepting anything before that project. So your project can be late up until the next project is due, and that just stopped us from getting an overwhelming amount of projects at the end of the course. It's been easier to monitor without that rule in the online environment because it's so much easier to visually see where students are. That has made it easier for me to send regular announcements and reminders to the students that are falling behind, and I haven't had to implement that rule.
And that's where the bullet point on late work, that's why I started doing the quizzes, because it was like we talked about before, that they weren't coming to class, they weren't engaging. And so then I put in the quizzes, and every 3 missed quizzes, then they get a full letter drop, which seems like a lot, but that would be them missing 3 weeks of class. So my students were a little shocked at that because they were used to the no due dates, but that has kept them coming to class and engaging more with the material. And before, like Brandi was saying, we did not have they can be late up to a point. We had that they just needed to be turned in by the end. And what we both found that semester was students were turning in 5 projects on the last day. And it was too much. It was too much. So we wanted to keep the freedom to keep it a little less stressful, but so that's how we came up with the not past the next check-in, because then at that point we're on to completely different topics. And so how are they going to be able to do a project on something we learned 2 months ago? So that has actually been working. Students still procrastinate, but at least we do have those hard deadlines where it's keeping them moving forward versus, oh, I'll just turn them all in the last day and they've got 20 worksheets and 5 projects and we have 5 minutes with those students. So It is.
For the online classroom, adopting the warm demander way of communicating with students has been extremely helpful. Because I realized in my face-to-face class, I was either demander or I was warm, and I had a hard time mushing those two ideas together. And so going through in detail what warm demander sounds like and how it works in the classroom has helped immensely with keeping students on track and getting them motivated to improve without necessarily attaching it to a grade. How many projects are there in a semester? I am doing 5 projects in most of my classes right now. So it's like a project replaces an exam almost.
And same, I do a chapter project. So every chapter is completed, we get a project for that. When we first started this, we made the
We're doing
mistake
it
of
with
doing section projects. And so we had like 20 projects by the end, and that
was a bad idea.
really bad, really
Don't do
bad idea. Students hated us.
This was our way to keep ideas going for what you can do next. If you're going to schedule collaborations, definitely reach out to your administration about supporting it with food. That is the most important thing to offer people when you get them together and talk about grading this much, is you have to keep them full the whole time. They want to see, okay, so most of my calculus projects are 4 to 5 minute videos. It would be difficult to show them in this, but certainly we can send them out. So we can send some examples to Mallory to get to the participants, and that way you can see the projects. And hopefully that's helpful. I guess we can all sit here and watch one of my calculus students who rewrote, oh no, it was a trig student who wrote, I'm blanking on high size baby for the unit circle. It was unit circle.
Didn't he do poker face too?
He also did poker face. There was quite a few, and they're really great projects, but it's just, they're very long videos to share.
Yeah, one of my favorite videos, 2 students did, is they redid Jeopardy, but it was for that chapter, but it's like 22 minutes, but it's perfect.
Yeah, and again, the video I have for my student in SSCCC is a 25-minute video. So they're great, but they don't really work well for a webinar.
But we'll definitely
maybe we can get our data team to do some sort of like highlights.
I just wanted to let everyone know I put in the chat so that they can download before they leave the slides that you went through today, and then also your calculus handbook that you shared with me earlier.
Awesome.
So I don't know if you wanted to speak a little bit about the handbook and how you use it.
Yeah, sure. The calculus handbook is essentially our syllabus, and it runs through everything that's going on in our calculus class.
So when we created it, at the time, Brandi was teaching Calc 1 and I had Calc 2 and 3. And so it was kind of supposed to take them along the entire series, but it just talks about why we switched to this project-based grading, what projects can look like, what the worksheets are going to be like, what to do if you're going to miss class, what to do if you missed a check-in, anything like that. So it's just a big version of the syllabus. And we had our grading breakdown in there. And so the idea was they got it with Brandi and then kept it through all of us. So you want to show the examples or the ideas?
So we have our introduction to the class. So if you scroll back to the second page, this was a really elaborate handbook to make. And like I said, it's our syllabus. So it's a fill in the blank syllabus. We just reuse it and students fill out what the required materials are, what the student learning outcomes are, so that we can just print this one thing and hand it out. And then it talks about projects and project-based learning. This particular copy needs some updating, but if you scroll a couple more ahead, we get into how you pass the course and how it's graded. And then also the project portfolio is in here. So we went through a lot of effort of making sure that students knew the vibe of the course and that it would be creative and sort of a non-traditional course right out the gate, because we thought it was more fair for students to know what they were signing up for. And so we wanted to make sure that what they were handed on the first day reflected their expectations for the course.
So these are some of the examples that we kind of thought up before we actually did this. And students have come up with a ton of other things that go beyond this, but these were our ideas when we first presented this to them. So, I actually had a few students write essays and they would rather write essays than anything else, which I have students that have created their own TikToks, and it's all about math. And it like, from doing it in our course, you see people comment like, oh, can you work on this next? Can you do this next? And it's like expanded into this whole influencer for math, which I think is great. So if you want to be famous, maybe you can push students to do their TikTok.
It has not yet worked for me. Let me tell you, my YouTube still has 40 followers. That first class during COVID, that's all of them. So the second part of this handout is the portfolio. So it's printed as 2 different pieces. Up into my portfolio is the syllabus, which is handed to them. And then their portfolio is 3 hole punched, and it has their project guidelines so that they can literally build out a binder. So each project gets a project checklist. And when they make videos, we just include a QR code for how to get to their video.
And this was just an example. We wanted to show them our expectations of the checklist and the worksheets.
Thank you so much for sharing. This is amazing. A new way to look and do things. So we really appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.